Welcome back to the Malamut Law pregame show here from Ocean Casino's Gallery Bar, booking games. Mark Farzetta, Derek Gunn, Bill Colarulo, and Seth Joyner joining you today for the pregame festivities ahead of Eagles versus Dolphins. But let's go to Lincoln Financial Field right now. The scene of our primetime matchup with the 5-1 Dolphins taking on our 5-1 Philadelphia Eagles as well. The inactives list has just come out officially. Reed Blankenship, Bradley Roby, both injured, not playing, inactive tonight, as is Xavier Howard of the Dolphins as well. So let's go to Lincoln Financial Field, talk to our friend John McMullen. John, Bradley Roby being down, Reed Blankenship being down. What's the plan right now for the Eagles secondary?
Yeah, it's obviously the biggest concern with not only Tua having such a big year, but Tyreek Hill having a monster year, putting up more yardage at this stage of the season than any other receiver in NFL history. So that part's going to be difficult from the Eagles. Obviously, you have to cobble it together. Not only is Reed Blankenship out, but also Justin Evans already on injured reserve. So both of your starting safeties are out of the game. Terrell Edmonds, Sidney Brown, Mekhi Gardner are going to have to cobble it together. And we know the slot issues that this team has had since, really all the way back in the preseason when they lost Zach McPherson, Avonte Maddox. They tried James Bradbury there. They tried Bradley Roby's now out with the pec injury. They tried Sidney Brown there, just about everybody. And now it's going to be our old friend Josiah Scott getting some time as well. So, look, this game's about the pass rush, and those guys got to get home. They got to hurry up to it. And I think a lot of people are going to, as they always do, talk about sacks. But to me, it's not about sacks because the Dolphins get the ball out of their hands quickly. Tua Tagovailoa does it better than anyone. But if you can speed him up, he's susceptible for throwing the occasional interception. And that's how you have to go about winning this game from that explosive Dolphins offense.
Hey, John, the best way to diffuse that Dolphins offense is a steady dose of running. How shocked would you be if Brian Johnson and Nick Sirianni don't make a more concerted effort, keep the ball on the ground, keep the chains moving, keep their Dolphins offense on the bench?
Well, I do think it'll be a more concerted effort than last week, Degon, mainly because, remember, the Jets were down their top four corners. Now Miami's down Xavier Howard. He's going to be inactive. So, and obviously Jalen Ramsey's been out so far this season. So they're not looking good at cornerback either. However, I know the Eagles think they have a big advantage with their offensive line against Miami's defensive front. That necessarily wasn't the case as much with the New York Jets, who are far more talented in the front seven. And certainly when Lane Johnson left the game, that kind of manifested itself. But Lane's going to be back, and the Eagles think they have a big advantage. So I do expect the running game to be better, more effective, and the Eagles to go to it more as well.
John, this Eagles offense is in the top of the league in a lot of categories, but an area they've really struggled all year has been in the red zone. They were a little better last week, but you look at the Bills game against the Dolphins, they went 5 of 6 in the red zone. Eagles are going to have to put up points, and they're going to have to score touchdowns when they get there. Dolphins aren't very good in the red zone, 26 in the league. Do you think the Eagles can finally fix some of their red zone problems? And if so, what do you think they should be doing against this Dolphins defense?
Well, the Eagles' red zone issues, they feel they've been self-inflicted, a lot of times not being effective on first and second down, maybe having a negative play has put them in third and long situations, creating some issues. And anytime you're in third and long, it's interesting because the Eagles are really a run-heavy team in the red zone, and they were very effective last year, and a lot of that had to do with the quarterback run game and how many touchdowns Jalen Hurts had last year on the ground. Same has been the case this year, but it seems like teams are loading the box, daring the Eagles to run the football, to pass the football in the red zone. And the Eagles haven't been comfortable with that. And Nick Sirianni constantly says adapt, evolve, or perish. I think the Eagles are going to have to prove they can throw the football in the red zone. Maybe you add Julio Jones, a third big body. You already have two big bodies in A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert. Maybe that helps, but you got to be willing to throw the football to make people sort of lighten up on the run game. Then you can maybe get back to normal. I think, to me, the most interesting aspect of this game is Miami and how much they use motion, and the Eagles and how much they don't use motion. Basically, number one against number 32. And it proves you can be successful each way because the Dolphins have the top ranked offense in the NFL. The Eagles are number two. But the Eagles use a lot of tempo, a lot of empty sets, and that's why they don't use motion from 20 to 20. I think it would behoove them in the red zone to use it a little bit more. Maybe they get to that point, and we'll see if it starts tonight against the Dolphins, because you don't want to be settling for field goals against that Dolphins offense.
Hey, John, you talked about the motion that Miami uses. And a lot of it, in my opinion, is really window dressing. They're trying to figure out whether you're in man or zone, but they do a lot of things to get defensive players' eyes looking where they shouldn't. As Sean Desai talk about the amount of motion and shifting and jet motion and, all this stuff that they do, and, how disciplined the linebackers and the safeties are going to have to be to keep their eyes on their keys and not necessarily worry about where the motion is coming from and what they're trying to do with it?
Yeah, Seth, that's the whole point of it. Eyewash, eye candy, whatever you want to call it, that's what it is. It's to test the discipline of the defense. And specifically with younger players, sometimes it gets them a little off kilter. And heck, with veteran players, that's what happened in the Super Bowl. The defensive backfield, which had communicated so well during the season, kind of lost it at bad times in the biggest game on the biggest stage. So that's sort of the whole point of Sean McVay, Mike McDaniel, anybody, Kyle Shanahan, who uses a lot of motion. It's to test the discipline of that defense. Conversely, and you have Vic Fangio on the other side, Sean Desai, his disciple. That's why they play defense the way they play defense. And I think more so today than even if Reed Blankenship was out there, if Avonte Maddox was healthy. You're going to see more zone than usual, plus Tyreek Hill, because everybody's scared to death of him, and rightfully so, I might add. They're going to play, basically in the parking lot, I think. They're going to try to keep everything in front of them. And I know that's going to frustrate some people. And that helps not only with the motion, but also you're trying to limit the big play ability of Tyreek Hill, who, as I said, 814 yards through 6 games receiving, most ever in the history of the NFL through 6 games. So they're trying to limit the big play.
John, I know it's warranted, the fear that you talk about Tyreek Hill instilling in defenses. But I'm just curious your thought. I think that sometimes defense coordinators and players can be too respectful when it comes to him. Instead of getting up and challenging him, taking their shot and tackling, when the opportunity is there, instead of breaking down, not getting up in his face and, in press situations and getting their hands on him. There's no sense of getting up there if you're not going to put your hands on him. I just feel like, not all night, but I just think there's going to be some instances tonight where the Eagles cornerbacks are going to have to get up, because if you sit back against this offense and you play as much zone as everyone likes to play against them, I think that's one of the reasons why he hurts them so much, is that he has free access to go where he wants, to get where he wants to. And when he's running full speed and Tua hits him in stride, he's hard to deal with.
Yeah, and I think, part of what makes Tyreek is typically when you have these explosive, tremendously fast guys. Remember, every NFL cornerback is fast, but Tyreek is I like to call him just ridiculously fast in a fast guy's league. And it's easy to say, get up on him and be physical with him. But where he's unique is typically when you have track guys who can run by everybody, like Devin Allen on the Eagles. I mean, he's an Olympic hurdler. Typically when you have guys like that, they're not that good at the other stuff. They're not that good at route running. They're not that good at tracking the football maybe down the field. Tyreek is such a well-rounded, great receiver. I've never seen it before, somebody that fast. And if you get up there and you miss the press, you're done. You're done. So that's part of the reason why everybody, there's no recovery speed against Tyreek Hill. So if you miss, and he's a good route runner, he's adept at getting off the line of scrimmage. If you miss that press, big play waiting to happen. And that's why people play cautious against him, which I get that can be frustrating to people, but this is a rare player. I hate the term generational player because I think it's overused, and I think it means what it says, once in a generation. This is a once in a generation player, and that's why people play him the way they do.
John, I want to ask you about a guy, and just to set the tone here, I don't expect much from Julio Jones. I don't expect much. I expect a red zone target. I expect some third down targets right there. I'm certainly not expecting him to be an 1,800-yard receiver type of guy anymore. But what are the fair expectations the rest of the way forward with Julio Jones playing in this offense with Jalen Hurts and already two pretty good wide receivers there in A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mark. I mean, we'll see how healthy Devontae Smith is. Obviously, he's dealing with a hamstring all week, so he's not 100%. Maybe he'll be needed a little bit more if Devontae isn't at his usual level. But he's going to be on a pitch count. Nick admitted that, so he's going to probably play, maybe 20, 25 plays at the most. Is he an upgrade over Quez Watkins or Olamide Zaccheaus? Yes and no. Obviously, he's a better receiver, but I always say I think there's a science to roster building. It's not just putting together the best 5 receivers you can get. Otherwise, the Eagles could go out and sign Marquez Callaway. They worked out him, and he would be better than Olamide Zaccheaus or somebody, or Britton Covey. But you need guys to play roles. Britton Covey's a great punt returner. Nick Sirianni talked about Olamide Zaccheaus being the role player, being a guy who would be a part of his offense as long as Nick Sirianni is around. And he sort of went off unprompted about that. Where does Julio fit? I don't see the fit when A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are out there. Remember, we've been through 6 games, guys, and each game it seems we're like, why can't they get the ball to AJ early in the season? Why can't they get the ball to Dallas Goedert? Why can't they get the ball to Devontae Smith when he had 1 catch? And now you're adding another Hall of Fame receiver, the so-called big name trap that Joe Banner used to call it. Here come the questions. Is Julio going to get the ball? There's only 1 football last time I checked. I'm not sure I see the fit, to be honest, guys.
Hey, John, do you think Julio was brought in exclusively to help this team out with their red zone woes? I mean, they were at 46%. They were at 42% last week. Now it's up to 46%. And it has been shocking in a lot of ways that this team has been so inept in the red zone.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people said that because of the big body, but as I said, D-Gun, they already have 2 big bodies. So
Right.
I think it's been more of an unwillingness to throw those 50-50 balls, whether it's a fade or giving Dallas Goedert or giving A.J. Brown opportunities. And, there's been some bad luck as well. A.J. had a drop at one point. But, the irony is, in his prime, when Julio was arguably the best receiver, you remember Lennon got using him in the red zone.
Yeah.
And he's only had 10 touchdowns once in his career. So he's never been that dominant red zone receiver. So I've heard a bunch of people say that, but I think you already have his traits when it comes down to the red zone and more primary targets, and the Eagles just haven't used it. I think this is an indication of, maybe Howie said, I want this guy, and Nick's like, I don't know if it fits, but that's just my take on it.
Yeah, John, we talked about the Eagles' defense needing to get pressure on Tua. But you look at this Dolphins defense, even though they've struggled in some areas, one thing they've done well is get after the quarterback, tied for number 3 in the NFL with 21 sacks. A lot of guys know the name Bradley Chubb, but they got a lot of guys along that line that can get after the quarterback. Andrew Van Ginkel, Zach Seiler, and Christian Wilkins from the defensive tackle position. Do you think this offensive line for the Philadelphia Eagles will be able to slow down the pressure from that Dolphins defense?
Like I said, I think the Eagles are very comfortable that their offensive front's going to have the advantage this week. You're right, Van Ginkel's had a good season. I think Christian Wilkins is their best player overall on the front, and the Eagles keep running into these great interior players. It was Aaron Donald, and last week it was Quentin Williams. Now you have Christian Wilkins. I think he's the Dolphins' best defender. But, it's a luxury when you have Jason Kelsey, Landon Dickerson. I think Suo Pettis held up better than people expect. And we all know, we should know, the strength of this Eagles offense when Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata are out there is, they put them on islands and they forget about them. And I've watched too much Eagles football over the past 2 years to worry about Bradley Chubb, or even, if Jalen Phillips was 100%, or even if it's Andrew Van Ginkel. Lane Johnson hasn't given up a sack since I can't remember when. So I can't worry about other pass rushers because guys like Nick Bosa come in here and they do nothing. So I'm through worrying about the Eagles tackles. They put them on an island and don't worry about it. Now, if it's Jack Driscoll, then we can worry about it.
I was about to say, I know you watched last week's game, John. I'd be worried if Jack Driscoll's got to play. I want to go back to Julio just for a second. I just want to make a comment and then a question. I'm of the opinion that Julio is probably here more so for third down conversions. The Eagles this year, even though they rank first and third down conversions at 50%, it doesn't hurt to have that extra body that you have to defend, especially, when you're keying on AJ or you're trying to take away Dallas Goedert. Beyond that, I'm with you. I don't understand, the logic behind why you bring him in here other than that. The main point here, John, is I'm trying to figure out, I believe that, the Eagles have to run the football tonight, and I believe that they have to minimize, they got to figure out a way to minimize the possessions that you give Miami. I think if Miami gets to 10 possessions or more, it's going to become increasingly more difficult for the Eagles to win this game, almost impossible if you give them that many opportunities. This needs to be a 7-8 possession game at the most.
Well, I agree on paper, and I've even said the Eagles would never do this, but if they win the coin toss, I'd take the football, try to shorten the game, go on one of those 15-play drives, try to keep Miami off the field. I think that makes sense from a logic perspective. I will say to your third down point, the Eagles, as you mentioned, lead the league, but since week 5, they're converting 62.5% on third downs, which is astronomical. So, I don't know how much more you can do because that number's not even sustainable to the Julio Jones point. But, the Dolphins, I think everyone looks at the raw numbers and they're very impressive. 500 yards a game, 37 points a game. But, they played one team with over 500 record on the road, and they lost by 4 touchdowns. So here's where I look at the Dolphins and say, look, it's not their fault that Carolina's on the schedule, Denver's on the schedule, the Giants are on the schedule. they've taken care of business and beaten bad teams like they should, that tells me they're a good team. Are they a great team? Losing by 4 touchdowns in Buffalo gives me pause. And if they don't play well, I think this game is more of a sort of temperature test for the Dolphins than the Eagles. And I'm a little surprised how many Eagles fans are scared to death of this team. Maybe it's the Halloween season because everybody seems to be scared. Again, they played Buffalo on the road, lost by 4 touchdowns. So they're the team that needs to prove something, in my mind.
Listen, I agree 100%, but I'm scared. I'm one of those people that's scared because I know the type of defense that the Eagles play. And if you're going to play a passive style defense against this offense, I believe that they can light you up. I just do. Because, we used to have a saying, no free access, where we get up and bump the wide receivers, running backs, tight ends at the line of scrimmage and try to figure out a way to throw the timing of routes off. What teams don't do now, because to your point, they're afraid that if they miss, that they give up the big play, they play off and they let these routes time up, exactly the way that they're drawn up. And when you got a good, smart quarterback that can flat out sling the ball and you got weapons all across the field, they can hurt you. So, when I look at the first 3 games, the Eagles gave up 300 yards passing a game, and I get it. They're beat up, they're banged up, they got all these new guys, and it's just been, a mass unit. But at some point in time, you got to throw caution to the wind when the game is on the line, and you got to trust these guys. You got to coach them up and put them in position, work on their technique, all of those little small things, and you got to roll them out, and you got to do what you got to do, because it's either death by 1,000 cuts or one quick stab in the heart. But one way or another, you're going to die.
Well, I kind of, I think it could be more piecemeal. When I said that, I was speaking specifically of Tyreek Hill. Look, I'm not pressing that guy. Everybody else, Jalen Waddle, Braxton Berrios, yeah, go ahead. Knock yourself out, throw some curveballs. And Waddle is a very good receiver, but Hill's a little bit different. And really it goes back to his last season in Kansas City when everybody started playing so much cover 2 against the Chiefs. And if you remember, Patrick Mahomes really struggled the first couple games when they threw it at him because he was so used to that big play. So I think, we talked about the motion forcing the defense to be disciplined. That's what people try to do against Tyreek Hill teams. They want the offense to be disciplined. So if they have to go 15 plays, there's no false starts, there's no holding penalties. And, Connor Williams is out for the Dolphins. Those slow cuts, those that you're talking about, Seth, they could be derailed by the backup center getting a 10-yard holding penalty because he can't deal with calls. So I think that's the mindset behind it, and I kind of agree with it, at least when it comes to Tyreek Hill.
John, before we let you go, what is your prediction for Eagles-Dolphins tonight?
I do, as I said, I think the Dolphins have more to prove than the Eagles. I think the Eagles are coming off, obviously, a very poor performance, so that gives them sort of motivation to bounce back. They don't lose 2 games in a row very often in this era with Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. One of the toughest places to play, obviously, Lincoln Financial Field. I don't know if you heard, guys, but they're wearing Kelly Green jerseys. That's got everybody fired up. Yeah, I think the Eagles are going to win the game, and I think it's going to be lower scoring than people expect. I'm going 28-24-ish Eagles.
28-24 Eagles. Love that part of it. John, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate you, man. Catch John, of course, right there on the incredible Birds 365 with Jody McDonald throughout the week, right here on the JAKIB